So hello everyone, welcome to VizConnect, connecting you with the art of data visualization and storytelling. My name is Sagar Kapoor. I'm part of customer success team at Tableau. So VizConnect is your weekly community call which helps you to connect with the art of data visualization and storytelling. We have a LinkedIn group. Go ahead, connect with each other and learn from each other. All the sessions which are presented in VizConnect are uploaded to our YouTube channel. Go ahead, subscribe to it. Some great content waiting for you. We go ahead and follow VizConnect on Twitter. Keep updated with all our latest sessions and connect with the community. With that, let me introduce our speaker to today, Neil Richards. Neil works in the UK as EMEA BI lead for JLL and has been using Tableau for about 5 years. He has been a Tableau public ambassador since 2017, a Tableau Zen Master in 2018, and again in 2020, making him for the first and only Boomerang Zen Master. He has also served on the board of Data Visualization Society and is marketing and community lead for Viz for Social Good. Neil frequently blogs about data visualization and shares his design methods, thought processes, and personal data viz projects at questionsin.viz.com. I will go ahead and share the website. So with that, Neil, over to you. And today he will talk about patterns, polygons, and petals.
All right, thank you very much. Now, do I need to go ahead and share my screen once more?
Perfect. I can see your screen, Neil.
All right then. Okay.
Adios.
So thank you very much, Sagar, for that great introduction. I'm excited to be here at VizConnect. So let's go ahead and let's start now. I'm going to talk about patterns, polygons, and petals. When I decided I was going to do this talk, I wasn't sure kind of what technical stuff I had to show, but people said, well, you do a lot of stuff that's very like you, and you do a lot of small multiple stuff. Why don't you just talk about that? And I just thought, all right, I'm going to talk about all the stuff that I really like doing in Tableau. If you can't talk about that in sessions of this, what can you talk about? So that's sort of kind of what's going to be covered. Okay. Right. So let's start. Before we go into those three P's, let's start with another P, the preamble. So as introduced you to me, so I won't go on about myself too much, but I'll talk about the kind of stuff that I like to do. And here's, I love the idea of geometric art, and you've probably seen this before. This is by Pete Mondrian. I mean, it's art that looks like data viz, isn't it? You could probably do something like that in a tree map with Show Me quite quickly. So even something as simple as that makes you realize that Tableau could be pretty good for doing what you might consider interesting, colorful, artistic stuff. Now, I don't know if you know what Pete Mondrian in 1921 called this. He called it Tableau #1. So I wonder if he was onto something. All right, why did he call it that? Tableau, the word Tableau in English, this is its definition from Dictionary.com. So it's about painting a picture or a grouping of people, a scene. So it really works for pictures and data storytelling. And this is what it means in French. And I've highlighted the main reason. It's a board. So Tableau, it's a drawing board. It's a blank canvas. So I've always sort of used that definition to inspire me as to what sort of fun stuff I can do, and also to explain to people why Tableau is just so good. If you can draw it, you can probably do it in Tableau. And here's my latest thinking. It's a relatively new feature, the grid feature, just to help you lay out there in Tableau. But so it is not just a blank canvas, but it's like a blank sheet of graph paper. So for the kind of stuff that I like to do, where I've done a lot of geometrical stuff and polygons and designing things in grids, I literally start with a blank sheet of graph paper. So that's how I'm starting to think of Tableau. So some examples. Here's a sort of fairly recent one I did for Viz for Social Good. Now, the reason I love this one in particular is because our client loved it. So although it looks weird and it looks like a Viz that I would do, it had a lot of impact, and people looked around the screen to go, oh, this is interesting. What do these snowmen mean? What does my constituency look like different to the one next door to me? Now, it's not great for analysis. You probably want to dig down and find some proper figures for that, but impactful and in ways that get people talking. Sometimes these sort of fun geometric style grid vizzes can be really useful. And sometimes they can be analytic too. This is sort of quite simple for me, just a nice simple grid. And you can see quite quickly from this, and I've done it in a kind of planet stripes style, which countries are going up, which countries are going down in relation to the US in terms of how much it costs to buy a Big Mac. So sometimes you can do some of the kind of stuff and have a sort of analytic bent to it. Now, here's my very latest, and this is what sort of prompted me to do this talk. I've found that you can visualize using flowers, and I've described these as even better than scatter plots, and everyone loves scatter plots, and you've seen the great work that Roslyn can do. As scatter plots, you can encode loads of dimensions. You can do it on size, on color, on position, on the shape of what you're plotting as well, and perhaps through time if you've got it moving and connected. Visualizing using flowers, it's basically a scatter plot, but with extra stuff. So you can do all that with the position in the center of your flower, but I've added petals with different colors, with different shapes, with different rotations. I've added a stalk. All the stalks I've added, they're just line charts. So although it's kind of unorthodox and it's not immediately analytic, you can add a whole load of extra dimensions still. So that's why I think it's really fun. And sometimes they're not analytic at all. I don't want you to think that they are. This was me visualizing my favorite book. This was me thinking, I don't know how to code in R or Python and stuff like that, and how to do art sort of based, what's what I'm looking for. What I can do, I can generate sort of abstract art using Tableau like that. So this is just something, a bit of fun I had in order to use something, a tool that I could use to generate generative art. That's what I was looking for. And as I've said, look, this isn't for clients and board meetings. It isn't always going to be. And I like to make the reader do the work sometimes. You know that the reader has to do that. If you're going to do something which is abstract, which is different, which is not standard and chart type, you know that the reader is going to have to do the work. So you just need to understand that that's the kind of thing that you're doing. And I actually like that, but obviously there's a time and a place for it. So for me, it combines artistry and geometry. And the reason I love that is because there's only one of those two things I can do, and it is not artistry. I cannot draw, I cannot paint, I cannot represent something using anything other than Tableau. So for me, it's like picking up Procreate or Illustrator. I have both of those. I've tried to teach myself those things, but without artistic skill, I still can't, if you can't do it with a pen and paper, you can't do it with these tools either. I still can't draw a flower that looks like a flower. But I can use Tableau to give it a go using data. And in particular, I've got a recent blog post which sort of explains some of my thoughts behind that. And this was something that made me smile. As part of putting this talk together, actually, when I put this my flowers visualization on, you can see the AI which tries to think of the alt text. It's recognized it as a group of colorful flowers. Now, I know that I've actually just put a whole load of polygons in Tableau and arranged them in the shape of a flower, but it has been recognized, once that's been exported into a desktop, it has been recognized, albeit with low confidence, that these look like flowers. So I felt quite sort of pleased with that as a non-drawer and painter, that I've been able to generate that. All right, so let's start with one of the first P's in my title, which was patterns. And so for patterns, I want to talk about the act of putting things into grids. So a lot of my stuff is sort of in grid format. Sometimes I do more than that, but that always tends to form the basis. And I put plan your grid before you start. Now, I don't know if some of you, if you've done things in rows and columns, you might be aware of some of the shortcuts and the formulas that you can use in Tableau, but they're quite complex, I think. I would certainly have to look them up. But what I tend to do, because I'm using static data, or because I've decided what I'm going to visualize, whether it's a large number of things or a small number of things, usually you know exactly how many there's going to be. So here's my example. This was a challenge when the Data Visualization Society started. there were 3,515 data elements of people. I went back to my old school maths and I thought, right, what are the prime factors? And it turns out it's 5 times 19 times 37. So, all right, I can multiply those first two together. I can do 95 by 37. It's going to be long form, but there wasn't anything that was more square like that. And I personally, when I do grids, I don't like having things that don't match. So I don't know what I'd have done if this had been a prime number, but fortunately for me, it wasn't. But decide what you're going to do, but decide beforehand and sort of map out what you think your rows and columns are going to be. And then once you've done that, there's lots of ways you can do it in Tableau, but you can just pretty much do it manually. So you can do it in Excel before you even start. This was when I was looking at all the words in an album, and you can see I've got the word row and the word column, and this is only halfway through it. I knew I wanted 60 columns, and I can't remember how many rows it was going to be, but I just assigned it gradually, one by one, in Excel, and you can do that pretty easily with sort of fill down like that. You don't have to hard code it in Tableau. You can hard code in Tableau if you like. This was what I did in my flowers one. I recommend this for smaller grids because obviously you're adding calculations and processing time. Case when is better than if else. Again, in this case, this isn't too big, so it's not too bad, but you wouldn't want to do this for 6,000 words of an album or anything like that. But you can put them in manually. So that was just me assigning teams to positions. Little caveat I put there is my rows are in reverse order. So when you have rows and columns showing you've got your rows 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and your columns across like that, why have I in my rows started at 4, 3, 2, 1? So that the top alphabetically, it looks like they're going to go to the top there. The reason for that, which we'll come to as a bit of an aside, that works when you've got them discrete, but once you make it continuous, so if you're going to scale it up or do something to these figures and it becomes continuous, then your x-axis starts from 0 at the bottom and it will go 1, 2, 3, 4. So you actually want your high row numbers to be what shows up at the top, rather than your low numbers, which it would be if you were using discrete rows to put your column into your viz into grid form there. So that's just something to notice, that sometimes your rows will flip from what you originally thought. So you can either change them here, or you can just you can tick the reversed box in your axes a bit later on. Or you can calculate in Tableau, but you can calculate in Tableau once you know how many rows and columns you wanted. So this goes back to my DVS example where I knew there were going to be 37 rows, 37 columns rather. So I know that the row is going to be just whatever the divisor is by 37 and get rid of the remainder. That's going to form my rows. The columns are just going to be the remainder of that amount. So the remainder from 0 to 37 are going to be my columns. Now, the only reason I've taken 1 away from my ID there is because if I didn't, the columns would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up to 36 and then would end in 0. And that's not going to quite be in numerical order. If you take 1 away, then you have 0 on the left, and so your columns become 0 to n-1, if you like. So that's just a trick. If you don't remember it and you put it and you realize your rows and columns are just out by 1, then that tends to be when you remember just to take the 1 off there. Or you can do, I mean, I've called this unorthodox. This, if I remember rightly, this is the one behind me, where I just wanted to visualize the number of UK number ones in the 1980s. And it wasn't a number that came into a nice square or rectangle. So I tried different combinations, ways of arranging them, and the different shapes. I literally got graph paper out. I tried to figure out a nice arrangement, and I came up with that one with spaces in between the rows and columns. I thought, well, that's okay. That gives me extra sort of breathing space. It gives me a nice look. You can do it like that, and then just pull in your rows and columns. So, you know, there's nothing that's stopping you from doing something like that. Tile maps, just one of tile maps. Tile maps are also grids as well. They're no different, really. You probably, I won't talk about them much in this talk, but I've done quite a lot of tile map work as well, squares and hexagons. If you're using hexagons, just be aware that, you know, if you can imagine, you see them, they're sort of offset with each other here. So that's why each in the rows in my example here, for alternate columns, I've moved the row across by 0.5. And that gives you a tile map example there. Just make sure you use the right shape hexagon. There's two shapes, either sitting on the what you might call a sort of horizontal hexagon or a vertical hexagon there, depending on where the parallel lines are there. I think if you use the other shape hexagon, that's fine, but you then need to alternate the columns rather than the rows in the example I gave before. All right, the next P is polygons. So polygons, how do you want to, or how would you bring in shapes like this to visualize? So I always start by building the grid. So that's why we had the section earlier than this. And then again, I'm thinking of sort of graph paper. I've got the centers of where I want to build each of my shapes, or each of my collection of shapes maybe. And I just want to space them out. So just imagine they're a 100 by 100 square. I've started here by using spacers, which are parameters, so you might want to make a bit more, a bit less. And when I did that, I realized that actually I need a little bit more space in this particular example. So eventually you pick a fairly arbitrary number that you want to multiply your column and your row by, and then that's the amount of room that you have, if you like, to draw your shapes or to assign your shapes around these particular centers. So what we then do, or we'll do after this, is we'll build each polygon and we'll calculate that in relation to the center point. And as I say, you can actually sort of move, contract, and squeeze your center points by playing with spaces until you're happy with how it looks. Trigonometry, I mean, you're going to need to know a bit of trigonometry, I suppose, if you're going to do circles or half circles or anything like that. This is pretty much all you need to know, or I say no, remember, because you can always Google and find this kind of stuff. Anything based on the unit circle there, you need to have an angle. So you're probably going to want to sort of increment that angle, go around a circle or half a circle, and then just to remember your sine and your cos. So I use a shape spile. I'll show that in a little bit closer after this particular slide. This shape spile will have X and Y values in columns for all the different shapes or polygons that I might want to import. And then in the rows, I have an ID number. Usually 20, 30, 40 is enough. You don't need up to like 100 dots to join to make a circle, because, you know, at 20 or 30, it's still going to look pretty circular. So you don't need too many to bring in. Now, and the one other thing is I will always have a column just called join, and that join will have a 1, and I'll also have that join value of 1 in my main data file as well. So what that does, that scaffolds the data. There's clever ways you can scaffold the data within Tableau. I've never done that because I never quite got the hang of doing that. To me, this is much simpler. Just join and bring in however many copies there are based on ID. I think in this case, I've used 38. And you can bring in your polygons. The one thing to remember is you have as many values of IDs you think you need to calculate your polygon and draw it, and then have one at the end to join it back to where you started, and that's essentially will color in your polygon. And this is what my one looks like. It's kind of a work in progress. Because I'm doing it in Excel, I'm sure I'm working there, if you like. I've figured out things in degrees. I converted into radians before I've sort of done the sine and the cos. I've worked it out. I've had another one there where I've divided by 2, because I thought, well, I want to do a semicircle instead of a circle, or then a quarter circle instead of a semi. So all you then need are the X values and Y values. So I think in this example, I've called them X semi, Y semi, X quarter, Y quarter. I even had what I called a tiny circle and a box there. So you can sort of make lots of different shapes on this. I even used box because I wanted to pull in a square. I knew I didn't need whatever that is, 38 different IDs, but I was still using this system and pulling it in. You don't need all these extra columns like your degrees to whatever, but all the X's and Y's that you pull in, you then have as variables with a copy for each path ID once you bring it into your main data. And I know I'm whizzing really quickly through this. I'm sort of trying to combine ideas I've had on lots of vizzes just into a sort of half, 3/4 hour talk. I'm hoping to sort of give you the principles and the inspiration. So the principle from this is that you can design your polygons and the shapes and pull that in. So hopefully you can have plenty of this. Anything that I do or anything that I've ever done on Tableau Public without exception is downloadable. So maybe you'd be able to, if you're really interested, have a look, or you can always contact me in all the different ways that Sagar is mentioning there and find out a little bit more about how I do things. But I'm going to keep rattling on through. So when you use your polygons, you match on the join field like that, and then you've got these new X's and Y's. So whether you bring in semi for semicircles or circle for circles or something like that, you add to the X and Y that you've generated from your grid. Now, you might be scaling on size. You might want a bigger shape based on a particular dimension. So you can just use that multiplier, and that multiplier will obviously work on, obviously, if you multiply every single element of the shape, then the whole shape becomes that size in proportion. So that's nice and easy to do. You put all the marks on view, and then your path ID will then become the path shelf for drawing the polygons. If you don't want to color in your polygons, you should have a line mark instead of a polygon mark. And here's an example. So this is kind of what it looked like at this stage when I pulled in all the shapes. I've decided to make the shapes bigger or smaller based on the number of weeks that each of the songs was at number 1 here. You didn't necessarily have to do that, but just to show you, I started off with my my adjusted X here, so that's where I worked out from the rows and columns and the spacer, and I'm going to add X1 and Y1, which is what I pulled in from the polygons. And you can see here I've chosen my shape, semi-quarter or box, depending on another dimension of the data, and I've decided to size it by the number of weeks at number 1. So just a way of showing so many different ways you can bring dimensions in to change the shape, the color, the size of your polygon, and then once you've decided how you're going to do that, you bring it in and you will add that to wherever you decided to make the center of your grid. All right, so patterns and polygons, onto the next P, which is petals. The reason I made petals separate is because I mean, if you look at this example, all the petals are at different rotations. So it's ultimately the same as what I've just showed you, because I'm going to bring in one petal shape, but we need to do some additional work to put it in the right place, depending on where we want to place it and depending on how we want to rotate it. So some of this is going to look sort of the same. Again, include it in your shapes file and design your own shape. I mean, I used the circle and squidged it, so the ratio of Y to X was not the same. You could probably figure out a way of making it more or less elliptical, maybe more petal-like. You know, how you decide to bring in the shape and how you decide to design it, you can do it manually, and it will probably look a little bit more organic. It's completely up to you. But that's how I chose to do it: long, thin, and vertically. Now, the key thing is, I know that I'm going to place all of them vertically on my screen, and I'm going to want to rotate them about the bottom part of the petal. So the formula that's easiest to use for rotating will rotate about 0, 0, so where X is 0 and Y is 0. So that's just how I've designed it. So it's like a circle, but I've just translated it so that it will start at 0, 0 at the bottom. So this looks a little bit of a little bit scrappy. This is how the petals then looked when I brought them in before I rotated them. So if you see anything on the right, you've got the dots which are kind of representing the circle, and all of my petals are there. They're in different colors and sizes the way I want them, but they're all facing vertically. But that's okay. That's a good start. So in order to place them, I basically, again, I've used what I know the circle center is going to be. So I've got my petal start place, and I've decided to put them a rotation around my center start based on the player number. That player number, I happen to know there's 40 of them. So there's a one for each 9 degrees, and then I can convert that into radians. So that's where I decided to do my X petal start. And again, I'm just moving it away from the center based on another dimension, the total team score. So that means the size of the circle is bigger if the team have scored more and less if they haven't. There's so many different places you can put dimensions in to encode things. And Y is very similar. I haven't shown you Y. X, this is just showing you the size. It's encoded based on the matches played, and that makes the whole petal bigger. And the difference between this and previously what we've done is we need to know how to rotate. There's a formula. Again, I knew I'd done this in school, but I had no chance of remembering it. But these things are easy to find, easy to Google, and this was easy to Google for this talk. It took me seconds. So if you want to rotate X and Y through an angle relative to 0, then that's what you will do. X cos theta minus Y sine theta, X sine theta plus Y cos theta. And in Tableau, what does that look like? That looks like this here. So my original X times cos of my angle that I want to rotate it by for X, and then what was it, Y sine theta, and then similarly over there for Y. And once you've done that, you can see for X, the only difference is I've changed it from X petal to X petal rotated. So once I've done this rotation, and then I add it to my original X, that's when the flower takes shape. So it takes a little bit of work, but it's also done incrementally. You start with your grid, you then assign your center of the flower to that. You decide your start position of the polygon you're going to put based on something else, and you add that. Then you pull in your polygon, and then you rotate it based on that, or based on the dimension of in my case, the player, and then you add all those elements together. So it all falls quite nicely into place, sort of piecemeal, and you can always look at each individual step one by one if you're debugging until you find out why. If your flower doesn't look right, once you find out why, you can just look at each individual step like that. Placement. So what do I mean by placement? Placement is just the considerations that once you've got some nice geometrical stuff looking in your worksheet, how do I put it onto the dashboard? There's just a couple of things to consider really here. The main thing is fix your axes. So this is my flowers. This was an earlier version before I put stalks on. So I wanted them to look to be in proportion, to be basically a 5x4 grid. But if you don't fix your axes, Tableau doesn't know that's what you want to do. So Tableau might just sort of stretch it out a bit further one way than the other. Depends on your screen resolution, depending on what else you've got on your screen, but also depending on the length of the petals. They're all sort of quite random. So you need to then go in and make sure that your X and Y are in the right ratio. Now, these are just numbers. They're points on graph paper. It doesn't mean anything at the moment. So that's why I've started them at 50. Starting at 0 means nothing on this. But I needed to make sure that the ratio of X to Y was exactly 5x4. So we'll put 5 flowers in that way, 4 flowers in that way. If you don't do it exactly like that, or if you forget to fix it, it'll just be stretched out a bit, and you won't be able to figure out why. And you might see the circles in the middle of the flowers might look a little bit like ovals, ellipses. Now, what I put at the bottom then is if your shapes aren't circle, or if they aren't squares, so if they aren't evenly sided all round, then you need to consider that as well. So in my earlier example, when I had them in rectangles, no, I can't remember what the ratio was, but let's say they were 3x2, then I would need to make sure the overall ratio of the axes would need to be 3x2 as well. And one example that I'm going to show you for the ratio of width by height that you need to consider is hexagons. And it was ages before I realized this. You can't fit a hexagon exactly into a square like that. I have no idea how this is calculated. I could probably work it out because I'm a nerd like that, but it doesn't matter. I've just Googled it, and you can see that they are 15% wider than they are taller. So that's just something to remember. If you're trying to put your hexagons together into a grid map and you think, well, I've got the same on my rows that I have on my columns, but it seems a little stretched, or they're not fitting together right, then that will be why. So just make sure that you remember that ratio, or you Google it, or you come back to my talk and you remember why. And then on your dashboard, I've just said float all your worksheets. I mean, very often you're going to have a number of worksheets that you want to float onto on top of each other, because you might have polygons all sort of worked out in different ways. And use exactly the same size or ratio that you had in your worksheet as well. It doesn't have to be the same numbers in the axes, but it has to be the same ratio. So if we go back to my example before, it has to be exactly 5 by 4. So whether you do that, I don't know what that would be, 1000 by 800 or some multiple of that, you need it to be exactly the same. And don't use padding, because if you use padding, let's say you padded it by 10 all the way around internally, then your usable area isn't 5 by 4 anymore. So, all right, you can use padding if you use padding in the same ratio as well, but it's just easier not to. Just make sure that you take that in mind in your design to make sure you've got enough room to breathe without using padding. So they're the main dashboard tips themselves. As long as you're using exactly the right ratio to show, then your shapes, the squares or whatever, won't be stretched. Tooltips. Now, a lot of what I do is not sort of heavily tooltip dependent. If you're thinking this would look great on a wall or as a static image, I'm not a huge user of tooltips, but if you are, remember it's going to be only your very top sheet that that uses tooltips, or that's able to show tooltips. So one trick around that is you can make a completely transparent layer. So you can have a whole array of different polygons and bring the transparency down to 0, so the whole thing is white and transparent. But you can add your tooltips to that. So if that works for you, you can then place that on top of all of your other layers. All right, so those are my 3 Ps. Postscript, just to sort of sum up, if you like. So these are things I've kind of covered. Tableau is a blank canvas. I've always thought of it as a blank canvas for you to draw, to sketch, and to use data as your medium. I'm now kind of thinking of it as a blank canvas of graph paper. So, if you're doing more geometrically and thinking in grids and you're planning your grids, just think of Tableau as your graph paper. Work out your rows and columns. You can do that manually. They're going to be the center points of what you do. You can use shape files, which you import and use whenever you want to reuse them. You're going to need a bit of trigonometry, but mainly just sort of based on that sort of sine and cos for points around a circle, and also that rotation formula is useful as well. So we place polygons in relation to our center points. I told you the formula for rotating. And again, just make sure when you're placing things onto your dashboard that you have exactly the right range and ratio so that everything falls into place okay. And finally, this is basically, and I was going to put these, but Sagar, I've seen these things flash up in front of my eyes, so thank you for sharing some of my details here. If you want to see some more of this stuff, if you want to get hold of me, say, Neil, that was really interesting, you rattled through it, and I'd love to know a bit more about how you did X, Y, Z, then these are the different ways you can get hold of me. And I'm always happy to help or connect with people who are interested in the kind of stuff that I do. And just to say thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you, Neil, for that. I think thank you for all the inspiration and motivation. And imagination is just a limit in Tableau, right? That is one thing.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, I mean, there is no limit really. I'm sort of well known for thinking up things and then bringing it from my imagination or from whatever I've seen or whatever album cover I might have seen, and then thought, right, how can I bring that into Tableau and draw it geometrically? So.
Perfect. So if you have any questions for Neil, just go ahead and put it into the Q&A tab or the chat. Happy to ask him. So Neil, I have one question, and it's all about how did you start your Tableau journey, right? So I had mentioned in my introduction, it was 5 years before, but if you want to just go ahead and talk about it, how you got started with the tool. Yeah.
Well, my Tableau journey is interesting because I was in a market research consultancy, and we were asked to look at Tableau. So I had a look at it and I was quite excited. But way back then, there wasn't a great amount of stuff done on survey data. And I couldn't find the right people to explain some of the great stuff that Steve Wexler had done. So it was quite stop-start for me. So it meant that I wasn't really in a position where I was using it, but I'd seen enough that I really liked it. And I thought, well, I don't see how I can use this in work, but I'm going to start learning. So the first year I started was also the first year that Makeover Monday started. It's huge and successful now, but it started with about 10 or 12 people doing it. And so I just dived straight into Makeover Monday. And I had sort of encouragement from some of the early Zen masters who were doing it then. And that was a huge learning curve for me. So once it came to a position where I had a job where we did use Tableau again, I'd learned all sorts of techniques and chart types and things like that from teaching myself through Makeover Monday. And then I got back into Tableau and then, well, never really looked back.
Thank you, Neil. And there is one question over here. Can you give examples where can be PETAL used in terms of use cases? I have seen your Premier League example. Maybe if you want to talk about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, if I'm honest, use cases, pretty much everything I showed you today is stuff that I've done for fun. So the use cases is, do you enjoy data? Do you want a creative hobby? But do you want a creative hobby that uses a BI tool? Then, so most of my use cases have been for personal use, for fun. Now you do learn skills that you can then go back and reapply. So, you might be, it's a lot of this in business, but you might a bit, small multiples can be quite good ways of showing. There are times when it's okay to use something radial maybe, or a radar chart, let's say, with caution. And so the learning how to draw circles and radial and polygons and things like that do help. So most of what I've done in order to teach myself Tableau and to learn new skills has been in stuff that I've done for fun or through community projects or for pleasure or for stuff that I think is going to look good on my wall, even if no one else thinks that. But you take that inspiration, you take the knowledge of what Tableau can do, you take the features that you've learned because you really wanted to learn the latest version, do more fun stuff, and you take them back into your work environment. So it's kind of, it's all done sort of by infusion like that, if you like. Perfect, but you're right. You couldn't go into a football manager boardroom and say, "Hey, boss, have you seen the number of players that Burnley have been using? Look at this flower." You get laughed out of the changing room. It's not as simple as that. But if you're doing personal projects and you enjoy the data you're looking at and you find the insights that you're coming up with fun, even if you're showing them in unorthodox ways, then you get so many benefits and advantages indirectly from doing it that you get the direct benefits and advantages, if you like, once you go back to work and once you use Tableau more for how it was originally intended.
Thank you, Neil. And Neil, how do you motivate yourself and inspire yourself, right? Just to go ahead and think about all these things, right? And as you said that you can't go ahead and do all these things in when you're designing dashboards for your organization, right? Because it has to depend with the type of like you're going ahead and presenting to the executives, right? What is your, I think, mantra over here for inspiration and keeping yourself going ahead and motivated that, yes, I want to challenge myself to go ahead and create such visualizations?
Mostly my inspiration comes from it comes from other people or other visualizations that I see. I like to keep abreast of what's happening outside of the Tableau world, and often I seek a challenge in thinking, I've just seen a gorgeous visualization by Giorgia Lupi, or I've just seen I want to draw flowers like Valentina De Filippo can draw. I wonder if I can do that in Tableau. So it's you mentioned sort of imagination, but a lot will be sparked by something else that I've seen, or a visualization that's been done in different software or with different concept, a different context, and it then becomes a challenge, if you like, something that I'd like to do. For me, it's we're in lockdown right now, so for me, it's a creative hobby. And as I've said, it's the only creative medium that I have the skills or ability to use. And so I'm sort of looking. I have my eye out for ideas. I see what other people are doing, and if it seems fun, or if it seems something that I would love to be able to do myself, then I see if I can put my mind to it, and whether Tableau can do it using the skills that I figured out myself along the way.
And Neil, Jyoti is asking, do you follow any data viz books about creativity and other ideas?
Pretty much, yeah. I do. I follow a lot of people on Twitter, and on Twitter I sort of started on Twitter because Makeover Monday and some of the Tableau community projects were so useful for me in my development, and that's also where I sort of get the inspiration. So it's where I find out about events. It's where I see portfolios of other people. I buy a lot of books for inspiration, for data visualizations there as well. I'm excited to see the data sketches book, which is coming out very soon from Nadia Bremer and Shirley Wu. So I'm always sort of looking out for anything that I can find for inspiration like that. And also a lot of what I follow some sort of design accounts and things like that. And if I'm not a young man now, but if my 20-year-old self looked at me, my 20-year-old self was a mathematician and had no interest in art or design or anything like that. Tableau has brought that out in me, and has made me realize that I can combine, data and logic and maths and the kind of thing that I always could do with new stuff that I'd never even thought about, design and color and art, if you want to call it that. So that's where I get my inspiration from.
And then what has been the role of Tableau community in your journey, right?
Well, the role of Tableau community is it's been sort of organic, really. I mean, I started by saying that Makeover Monday is where I sort of honed my craft, if you like, and that's still going stronger than ever. And there's no better example of a Tableau community project. And as I said, because so much of what I've done has been sort of personal projects and things, I've needed to be aware of what the community is doing and to contribute what I do to the community as well. And then it just becomes a hive mind of great people, of ideas, of inspiration. And as I always say, if you can't figure out how to do something in Tableau, or if you've got an idea, someone in the community will have figured it out before you, and they would have blogged about it, and they would have shared it, and they would have done it selflessly. It's such an easy way to learn and to grow and to gain skills. And then if you take Tableau community further, the people that you meet and connect with, whether it's virtually these days or whether it's in person at user groups and in conferences, every person you meet just adds to the experience and adds to the inspiration or ideas that you might get from them, or that you might want to share.
Thank you, Neil, for that. And just as a last question, any advice for someone who's just getting started with Tableau?
Yeah, certainly. I would just say explore, throw yourself into things, and do look at personal projects. So look at something where grab yourself a data set which you think is going to be fun to look at. So I've done all sorts of things that I've sort of shown you in here, but if you look at the topics of what I was visualizing, it was football teams, it was number ones from the 1980s, which is another clue to my age. It was the words from my favorite book. It was how many ways could I visualize my favorite album, that kind of thing. If you can just sort of get hold of data about things that you think are fun, so it might be your favorite TV show or music, or it might be personal data about your fitness or things you're doing in lockdown, then you don't mind staring at that data for ages, or you don't mind trying lots of different things to find a story. It becomes, I keep saying the word fun, which might sort of say more about me than it does about others, but you don't mind so much then, or spending time with data. And quite often I end up going down rabbit holes and related to Tableau when I sort of find out more about the data, that kind of thing. So I would just say, get some data, explore what you can do, try lots of different things, and also sort of take inspiration from community projects, again, such as Makeover Monday. Viz for Social Good is a great project that I'm involved with. We'll have a new data set for that very soon, in less than a week, and that's one of many community projects now where you have data available and the opportunity to visualize it, and a community of people who will help and share and kindly critique and help you learn each time you visualize.
Perfect. Thank you, Neil, for that. I think with that, it was an honor to have you on VizConnect. Thanks a lot for presenting and sharing your inspiration and motivation for everyone in the community, and also challenging us to think about it, right? What else we can go ahead and do in Tableau.
Oh, you're welcome. And as I mentioned, this is me giving a talk about what I love doing. So thank you for having me on. But it's honestly, it's no trouble at all.
Perfect. With that, thank you everyone for joining. We'll see you next week. Take care of yourself, and keep learning and keep challenging yourself. Thank you. Have a great weekend ahead.
Thank you, Sagar. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Neil. Take care.